Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion on the NHS at 70, with the birthday just 4 days away. So what a brilliant moment to be discussing the wonderful institution of the NHS, and what better experts to discuss it with and authors than Rachel Clarke and Adam Kay, two of the most acclaimed writers on the NHS and so many aspects of care in the last couple of years, which, with so much having gone on the political stage, the junior doctors strike, and all the issues around resourcing for the NHS. And two very successful books. Rachel has written Your Life in My Hands, The Life of a Junior Doctor. Adam has written This Is Going to Hurt, also Secret Diaries of a Junior Doctor. And both have been at literary festivals and talked widely about the books. And as well as a serious discussion, there are many laugh-out-loud moments in both books. So we're going to combine a bit of both, aren't we? And I'm going to start by asking Rachel and Adam. Rachel is a palliative care doctor in Oxford. Adam was an obstetrician, but is no longer practicing, but is now performing widely, talking about the NHS and doing comedy, and I think you said book festivals were a therapeutic experience. So we're delighted to have you both. So I'm going to ask both Rachel and Adam just to read short extracts from the books to give a flavour of what's in them. Then we'll have a bit of a discussion, and then maybe have a couple more extracts, and then a bit of Q&A from yourselves. So Rachel, would you like to go first?
Yes, thanks, Hugh. So I'm just going to start by reading an early extract from my book, which is about what it's like to be flung out of medical school and start out as a completely inexperienced doctor on the wards. And there's also a little bit about Jeremy Hunt in it. But this extract... oh, is that better? Oh, yes. Okay. This extract describes my first ever on-call shift. And I'm somebody who used to be a journalist, and I used to make films sometimes in war zones, even in places that were very dangerous, like the Democratic Republic of Congo. But my first on-call shift was, without a shadow of doubt, the most frightening experience of my life, including Congo. So I'll just read a quick extract from that. That's the NHS at 70. At age 29, I left my career in television journalism to retrain as a doctor. On swapping current affairs for a caring profession, I imagined I'd put war zones behind me. Yet ironically, given that hospitals are meant to be citadels of healing, the most frightening experience of my professional life was not those hours spent under fire in Congo's killing fields, but my first night on call in a UK teaching hospital. Had anyone predicted this at the time, I'd have laughed out loud at their hyperbole. But nothing, it turned out, quite matched for me the terror of being spat out of medical school into a world of blood, pain, distress and dying that I believed I must expertly navigate while feeling wholly ill-equipped to do so. My first set of nights loomed like a prison sentence. As a newly minted doctor, I knew 28 causes of pancreatitis, the names of all 206 bones in the human body, the neurophysiology of stress and fear, but not even remotely, how to make the emergency decisions that, if I got them wrong, might end up being the death of someone. No one had taught me what to do with all my knowledge. I wasn't even sure if I could correctly pick out the sick patients from the ones I didn't need to worry about. And yet, in dimly lit hospital wards across my site at night, several hundred patients' lives were about to rest, at least initially, in my inexpert hands. I felt like a white-coated fraud.
I'm going to put my stick in the sand and read you something revolting. Mine's a book that's got a lot of footnotes in it, so I'm going to have to do these manually. So this diary entry refers to what's known as a degloving injury, which is where the skin and associated blood vessels are torn from the underlying structures, like if a motorcyclist flies with their bikes and their hands drag along the ground, degloving. Say what you see. How many doctors are in the house, by the way? Well, that's good news, because it's 1,000,000 degrees and everyone's extremely old. 7th of February 2005 saw my first degloving injury. Patient WM is 18 and was out celebrating with friends after receiving his A-level results, 3 Cs. After chucking out time, he found himself dancing on the roof of a bus shelter, then decided to get back to ground level using a neighbouring lamppost as a fireman's pole. He jumped onto the lamppost and slid down koala bear style. He had misjudged the texture of the lamppost, which provided more friction than he had allowed for. He therefore presented to A&E with severe grazing to both hands and a complete degloving of his penis. This is far and away the worst penis I have ever seen. And I have seen a lot of penises. A couple of inches of urethra coated with a thin layer of bloody pulp, maybe 2 millimeters diameter in total. It brought to mind a remnant of spaghetti stuck to the bottom of the bowl by some tomato sauce. The patient was upset. This was made worse when he asked if the penis could be regloved. The consultant explained that the glove was spread evenly up 8 foot of lamppost in Fulham.
I think you get the idea about other. I mean, how do you pick up from that? One. I mean, it's a bit of a generalisation, but one theme in both of your books is the mental toughness and shutting out any horror or emotion about what you're seeing, with being compassionate. I mean, can you both elaborate on that, given the sort of things you've seen in your careers as doctors and how you've handled it?
I'll do it. Okay, fine, I'll take it. I thought you're the nice one. You should really take that.
Unless you go first.
So, in medicine, from the moment you apply to medical school until the day you retire, you're encouraged not to really think of yourself as being a human. And you don't ever talk about the bad stuff that happens, even though the very nature of medicine means that more bad things happen than good. So, you know, you've got great-grandkids, and they'll be applying to medical school. And you know, all you'll say is, congratulations, amazing, what a wonderful career. And it is. But no one at the start says, you need to have this sort of exoskeleton that to deal with these things emotionally. And no one checks that. So if you want to be a train driver, they'll put you through psychological evaluation. The same if you want to be an astronaut. The same if you want to go on Love Island, they'll do that. But if you want to be a doctor, all they do is they check that you've got some extracurricular activities, that you've got sort of grade 8 oboe, good at lacrosse or something. And if you look at the Wikipedia entry of any famous doctor, it's been the same forever and ever and ever. I'm just going to find one for you. He proved himself an accomplished rugby player in youth leagues. He excelled as a distance runner, and in his final year at school was vice-captain of the athletics team. And that's Harold Shipman. So it's potentially not a rock-solid system. And this continues all the way through medicine. The culture is we're bloody doctors and we bloody get on with it. Stiff drink, stiff upper lip, don't talk about the bad stuff. That's not helpful. And it needs to change, I think.
You talk in your book a bit about, is it Terence Stevenson saying doctors should be prepared like troops going into Afghanistan or something at the time? Yeah,
so at the moment, we're in an NHS where... checking. Can you hear me? Good. We're in an NHS where, in their wisdom, NHS England and the GMC have decided what junior doctors really need to cope with the conditions on the NHS front line at the moment is resilience training, as per the training that soldiers in our armed forces receive before they go off to Afghanistan and fight in Helmand province, which is pretty incredible, and that's not even an exaggeration. So Terence Stevenson's the head of the GMC, and he came out and said, this is what we need. And many of us find that an incredibly frustrating, and I'm using that word diplomatically, approach to a problem where actually, doctors by and large are pretty resilient people. You have to be to come out of university, go into this world where you're seeing people die, you're having to tell them they have a terminal illness, all those things. You have to be tough to cope with that. You have to be tough to work with the hours, the stress, etc. What isn't resilient, though, is the system in which everybody works at the moment. So the NHS, age 70, is an NHS that is short of 100,000 staff. So right now we're short of 40,000 nurses and 10,000 doctors. And that means everybody who's there right now is regularly doing the jobs of 2 people. And it's really tough and really scary. So I've worked on call shifts where I've got my bleep, my emergency bleep, and I'm just given someone else's and told, they're not there, tough, get on with it, you're looking after twice as many patients. And so you're running around the hospital absolutely terrified that someone's going to die because you can't clone yourself and be in 2 places at once. And that's almost the perfect definition of stress, I'd argue, where you're in a set of circumstances that you have no control over, but you're going to be responsible for terrible things happening. So to make doctors more resilient, we need to make the NHS more resilient, I would argue, and actually employ more staff. And then everything would be safer for patients, and also stop doctors sometimes being so ground down and burnt out that they either leave the profession or, worst case scenario, sometimes take their own lives. And we regularly hear of junior doctors committing suicide because they can't cope with the conditions they're working in.
Yes, I was going to ask about the pressures. I mean, Adam, your book is based up until 2010, and the pressure you describe was relentless then, with working very long hours, well past your shift, bleeps endlessly, no, can't even go to the loo, never mind have a cup of tea. And then patient demand's gone up sort of 3% a year since then, and now here we are, as Rachel describes it. How does it seem to you, sort of standing back and sort of looking at what's going on and what happened with you?
It is much, much worse. I mean, thanks for ruining the end of my book. But I did leave.
I haven't quite said what happens at the end of the book, but yeah.
But no, I left medicine. At the time I left, no one left medicine. It was like I was the first or second person in my cohort of hundreds and hundreds of doctors to leave. A glitch in the matrix. Now I can't look on Facebook, social media, anywhere without seeing brilliant doctors, people who've rescheduled their own stag do's for their job, leaving, working in the city, moving to Australia, moving to Canada. Someone I know is becoming a fireman. Imagine a job where you think being a fireman would be a much less stressful alternative. But meaner audiences than you have said in the past, asked the question, surely you knew what you were getting into. Surely you knew there were going to be bad hours. And you're sort of bleating on about that. But and obviously, we know that the hours are going to be bad. But there's so many more things, leaving aside the emotional side. So you're down to work however many hours a week, 70, 80, whatever. If it's 5 p.m. and someone starts bleeding out, you don't have a choice as to whether you stay and sort it out or go home. You've technically got a choice. If that's a choice for you, you'd have never applied for medicine in the first place. So you stay the extra 3 hours. And that just doesn't happen once every so often. This is routine. So you're texting someone always saying, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to bail on drinks tonight, I'm going to have to cancel dinner, I'm stuck at work. You're texting the same person 2 or 3 times in a row. And then eventually they stop contacting you. And how do you maintain a relationship as well, unless you live in a vacuum? Because another thing is you move hospital once a year if you're a junior doctor. It's a great theory that you work in lots of different hospitals in an area, some big ones, some small ones, some experts in this, some in that, so you can become a well-rounded doctor of your own. But the area they shuffle you around is quite big. For example, one of them is called Scotland. And it's very difficult to find a flat that's handy for all of Scotland. So you say to your other half, do you mind if we move 200 miles? And they say, yes, I do mind. Looking back through my diaries, I was a doctor for 7 Christmases. One of those 7 Christmases, I was able to spend it with my family. So it wasn't all bad. That was then. And now, a system that has had no slack has, as you say, 10,000 vacancies. And, cuts cause scars. There are lots of scars on the rota.
But, and I know there are medical students here today, the other side of it is that, I won't look at you when I say this, Adam, you wouldn't give up the job for, no, but sorry, I'm being unfair. Your passion for medicine and working with patients shines through both books. And certainly you say this was the career to beat all others in terms of contributing and doing something that you think is worthwhile.
Absolutely. Excuse me. I literally every day that I go to work, I think to myself, I'm doing the thing that I want to do more than anything else in the world. I love being a doctor. I absolutely love it. And it is such a privilege to care for patients. You guys, all of us, we're all patients. We all know patients. In a hospital where often the people, well, I work in palliative care, so I'm looking after patients who are terribly ill and who are often confronting the most frightening and daunting experience they will ever go through in their life, because they are confronting their own mortality. And to be able to care for patients and try and help and support them in every conceivable way, whether that is through drugs, pain relief, or surgeries, interventions, or all of those simple, tiny things that we know are such an important part of healthcare. So the things that knitted together constitute healing, things like holding your patient's hands, listening to them, hearing their fears, sharing their distress when they're frightened, all of those things, it is an absolute privilege to be a part of that. And I think I see at work every day human beings at their most generous, brave, compassionate, kind, all of the good things, they're most loving, actually. And a hospice, a palliative care ward where I work, people always assume that the predominant feature is death. It's nothing but death, death, death. That's not what I see at work. What I see is love. I see people grieving because they're losing someone they love. And I see people who are dying who care far more about the people they love in their family, for instance, than they do about themselves. So it's a privilege to be a part of that. And I love it beyond belief. And in fact, that's the essence of why I wrote the book I did. I desperately want to carry on as a kind, compassionate, caring doctor who is able to heal and help patients. And I know that all the doctors and nurses I work with feel exactly the same way. But if we're operating within a system that is chronically and endemically underfunded, we can't do that. We end up feeling utterly wretched because we want to be good, caring doctors and nurses, and we can't because there aren't enough of us. And instead of healing, we have to look at people who are screaming or crying on a trolley in a corridor because there aren't the beds in the hospital. And that's why I campaign for the NHS, and I think that's why Adam does as well. It's because fundamentally I want to live in a society that is humane enough to care properly for each and every one of us when we suffer the misfortune of being unwell.
And I think, Adam, that's a similar theme in your book, that you never for a moment doubted that this was a brilliant job, even when you'd missed most of your social life.
Well, that's the thing. You're driving home 3 hours late, and you're splattered with blood, and the radio's wound down. The radio's blaring, and the windows wound down just so you can stay awake, and your dinner's in the dog. But you've still got that smile on your face because you've got that non-specific feeling that you did a good thing, which is the reason that you apply for medical school in the first place, not for the money, as was once suggested by our political overlords.
I was going to get on to political overlords, and that's a good cue. So let me put it to you both. You talked about lack of resources, lack of staffing. The government, Theresa May and Jeremy Hunt, have just announced what they call a big funding increase, 3.4% over the next 5 years, compared with 2% for the last few. I think Jeremy Hunt's argument is, look, he was in a battle with the Treasury. It's a very difficult public finance environment. He fought until the last, supported by the NHS and the think tanks.
It was like being on Helmand Province.
Yeah. So I'm just going to put that to you. Yes, ideally the NHS would have more resources, but what do you think following that announcement, generally where we are for the next few years?
Do you want to go first?
Sure, well, just in the very simplest terms, the NHS needs 4% per year to tread water increase. It had that all the time I was working as a doctor and for decades before. For the last 8 years, rather than the 4% it requires, it's had 1% in real terms. What's now been announced is 3-point-something%. So it's not quite enough to tread water. And this isn't, these aren't figures from anyone with skin in the game. This is independent, think tank after think tank has come up with this 4% number just to keep things on an even keel, because it gets more expensive to look after a country. I don't think we can celebrate because we've been given just less than the amount it needs to tread water. I think we should be grateful that it's better than the 1% we've had in the past, but it isn't a bonanza, and it's certainly not a Brexit dividend, because whatever our feelings are about Brexit, and I shudder to think what they might be in this room, the NHS requires people from all over the world. And there's a crisis in recruitment and a crisis in retention. Both of those aspects have been hugely worsened by the announcement alone that they're not particularly welcome in these postcodes.
I second what he says, all of it.
I mean, I'll just play the sort of, the BBC interviewer, obliged to just put it, the Treasury will always argue, and have done, look, you just can't find this money when other departments are being cut. There is a very difficult public finance environment. I mean, is your argument that you should go for 4% or more and say you're going to raise tax by a certain amount and just go and do it? Is that really absolutely what the NHS needs and nothing less?
Well, it's not my argument, Hugh. It's the argument of the British people. So every time the population is polled on whether or not they're willing to pay more money for the NHS, the results overwhelmingly are yes. So around 70-80% of people polled consistently in multiple polls say they're willing to pay more money for the NHS, and they're willing to for their taxes to rise to pay for the NHS. So I think that's really important, first of all, because sometimes this, as you've just couched it, the argument goes, we have no more money, so if you want more money from the NHS, you have to take it from somewhere else. That's not clearly the case.
Could we take it from the £200 billion we're spending on exploding submarines, or the however many billions it's going to cost us to get to Birmingham 15 minutes quicker, or £1 billion we can give to the DUP as a bribe? Yeah. It is possible. It's like people say, oh, I don't have time to learn Spanish or whatever. You can if you want. You're just making excuses. You don't want to. They don't want to.
I mean, I think fundamentally, there's a really simple question here, and it's not a question for me as a shamelessly partisan NHS doctor, or actually a question for Jeremy Hunt or Theresa May. This is a question for the British public, and it boils down to this. You can either have a world-class health service that provides world-class healthcare for all our citizens, or you can accept as a population that we are not willing to fund that for everybody, and then you can have the debate about what you're going to cut and who's going to suffer, and you need to be able to look the consequences of that decision in the eye and know that that is a decision we are making about the health of our fellow citizens. Now, we're a pretty rich country. Even despite Brexit, we're still the 6th richest country in the world. My argument would be we can afford it. Let's be honest about this. We can pay for a rubbishy coasting along to in the second half of the EU average performance and health, or we can say, if we're going to choose what we spend our wealth on, let's make health a number one priority, or at least one of the big priorities, and let's accept we're going to fund that. But right now, we're in a situation where instead of being honest and candid and communicating with the electorate as a doctor should communicate with a patient, i.e. with integrity and trust and candour, we have political representatives that fudge all of this. They won't ask that question. They will just spin and gloss over and pretend that the 3.4% is a bonanza that's going to transform healthcare. What I'd really love to see as the NHS's 70th birthday present is honesty from the part of the government about where we go from here, and actually put the locus of responsibility to us, the electorate. We vote, we should be deciding.
But that'll never happen, because politicians are here today, gone tomorrow, thinking about 4 or 5 years' time when their job comes up for grabs. Should perhaps the NHS be taken... It's more important than politics. I've got my politics, we've all got our politics. But the NHS is more important than that. I know people of all colour ties who have issues with the recent administration it's had. If it could go up a level, if it could be cross-parliamentary, cross-party, so that you can make a brave decision like we need to put a couple of pence on tax after we've had our big conversation with the country, we need to pay more. So the people saying, yes, that is best for the country, best for our greatest national asset, aren't people in the back of their minds thinking, yeah, but what if the good people of wherever the fuck this is don't vote me in next time?
Could the NHS, I'm sure you'd agree, could also do things differently? Social care we haven't talked about. I mean, that goes without saying that needs more money and some form of integration. But how could that all work better as well as having more money?
So very often, I think there's a really sterile and stale debate about the future of the NHS because it's incredibly polarised. So either the only problem is insufficient funds, or the only problem is appalling inefficiency and bureaucracy, and everything could be done in a more streamlined, competitive way. Clearly, in the real world, there's a bit of both going on. It's very hard to be efficient if you are running out of the house with 3 toddlers around your feet, their packed lunches, school kit, your car keys, your mobile phone, you're trying to get into the car and miss rush hour, and you drive off and obviously leave the car keys sitting on the drive. You can't be efficient when you're run ragged. So you need to have the extra resources, I would argue, to provide the space and sanity among staff at every level, including managers, to actually stop firefighting and start working out how to do things more efficiently. At the moment, I would argue one of the biggest problems is partly how hospitals and community services work together, but mainly the problem I see is community services are desperately underfunded compared to the services provided in hospitals. So whenever Jeremy Hunt comes out with dubious statistics about nurses, he's always very careful to say nurses on our wards. And that's because although the overall number of nurses on our wards has gone up, district nurses, community nurses, health visitors have been ruthlessly cut. Those are the people who keep you guys with your senile ulcers, etc., keep everybody out of hospital. So if that's a false economy, and it's an easy false economy to make at a political level because nobody really notices elderly people in their homes with rotting feet because no one's changing the dressings of their ulcers. So we need a massive injection of funds into community resources across the board, but not at the expense of hospitals. That's where I think the new money needs to go more than anything. But thus far, all we've seen at a political level is we've had the rhetoric about beefing up community services and trying to integrate hospitals and community work. But all of that has been done whilst trying to cut costs overall. And all you're doing then is cutting services from hospitals and putting a greater burden on communities, and you haven't actually improved capacity there. So better community work.
It's worth saying, isn't it? I mean, we sometimes at the BBC get flack for you're always so negative about the NHS, saying how terrible everything is and showing, images of the NHS in the winter. It's worth saying, in the same vein, not as a contradiction, that the NHS scored very heavily in a survey this week by think tanks for accessibility, that it is a world-class system providing access to the greatest number of the whole population, and came top of the Commonwealth Fund survey in the US for efficiency. Given what we spend, we do very, very well. And I think it's fair to say that, isn't it, on the 70th anniversary coming up?
Absolutely. When we talk about the NHS, let's remember that we're not talking about buildings, and we're not talking about CT scanners. By the NHS being efficient, by the NHS needing more money, we're talking about the 1.5 million people who day in, day out, and coming home 3 hours late, give up their lives to keep it all going. And I think, and these people do a very good job. Every individual, I think, there are very few people who aren't feeling very stretched and having to go above and beyond.
And I think what you say, Hugh, is really important. So when we're trying to assess outcomes and how good a health service is, so the NHS isn't brilliant on some measures. So cancer care, for example, we are a poorly performing country in Europe, and that's an example of where undoubtedly things need to improve. But one of the many ways in which the NHS, I think, is second to none is this argument about accessibility, or maybe equity is the word I would use. So in what other country in the world can you today, in 2018, receive the same high quality healthcare, the state-of-the-art surgeries, a combined renal, pancreas, gut transplant costing hundreds of thousands of pounds, if you're a prime minister, a lord, a lady, a road sweeper? It doesn't matter who you are, what you earn, what your power and status in society are, or the loudness of your voice. None of those things matter. The NHS will treat you exactly the same, whoever you are in society. And I think that single fact about the NHS alone puts it head and shoulders above most other health services. In particular, of course, America is the antithesis of that. But actually, a lot of the more hybrid services across the rest of Europe, or Antipodean ones, Australian and New Zealand, they do not have that fundamental equity. And that surely, in a decent, humane, compassionate society, such as the one I still believe Britain is, in spite of everything, surely that is something to celebrate and be proud of.
Can I read out a really revolting story? I think this has got too serious.
Go on then.
29th of February 2008. Special occasions call for patients to insert special types of objects into their vaginas and recta. Christmas in particular has rewarded me well with a stuck fairy, a swollen vulva from a mistletoe contact allergy, and vaginal burns from a patient stuffing a string of lights inside and turning them on. Bringing new meaning to the phrase, I put the Christmas lights up myself. This is my first leap year working as a doctor, and the great British public have really pulled it out of the bag for me with a very, very specific injury. Patient JB decided to take advantage of tradition and propose to her boyfriend, going to the expense of buying an engagement ring, the trouble of putting it inside a Kinder Surprise egg, and the imagination of inserting it vaginally. Her partner would discover it, retrieve it, and then she would go down on one knee, equal parts unexpected, disgusting, and I suppose romantic. Unfortunately, which is a word that appears a lot in this book, unfortunately, he was unable to retrieve it as planned. It had rotated itself lengthwise, and no amount of sugarling from either of them would get this particular goose to lay its golden egg. Remarkably, she was so keen to maintain the surprise, she wouldn't tell him what she'd done or why, but eventually decided it was a hospital matter, so we met in cubicle 3. It was a very easy delivery with a pair of forceps. She hadn't told me about the contents of the egg either at this point, so there was a moment of confusion for both me and the boyfriend when she asked him to open it. I gave him a pair of latex gloves, sandblasting the last trace of romance from the scenario. She popped the question, and he said yes, presumably out of fear as to what a woman who does that with the Kinder Surprise would do to him if spurned.
Have you got anything to add on Kinder Surprises? Did you want to do another reading, Rachel, or shall we? Yeah.
Yes.
Continue. Yeah. Go on. And then we might throw it open.
Okay, I'm going to do a reading from the opposite end of the spectrum. There are no genitals in my reading. Sorry, Adam. I would like to read just a short extract, very personal extract, from right at the end of my book. My father was an NHS doctor, so was my granddad, so was his dad, so come from a long line of doctors. And while I was writing this book, Dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So I was campaigning and working in palliative care and also looking after my dad. And I felt inspired to write this piece right towards the end of the book, really because of something that we've, I hope, all experienced in this room, which is how when disaster strikes and when the awful bolt from the blue affects you or a member of your family, there is this astonishing way the NHS scoops you up and cares for you in those times when you least expect them and which are so hard to deal with. And I certainly felt that incredible gratitude that I think we all do when that happens. We all love to live our lives assuming nothing bad will ever happen to us and our families. We know it might theoretically, but boy, when it happens, does the NHS step up. For years, I've looked after patients with cancer, spent innumerable hours talking with them and their families, believing I had sufficient insight and empathy to understand the cataclysm through which they were living. As so often, it turns out I was wrong. Until it's felt, I'm not sure cancer is truly understood, even by the most seasoned oncologist. The world of scans, procedures, surgeries, chemotherapies is saturated with more hope and fear than I ever knew possible, even after years of medicine. Every nuance of every conversation with the doctors is scrutinised. The exhausting, endless vigilance. You try logic, research, blind faith, cold reason, every mental power you possess to stave off the worst-case scenarios. You ache with longing to take away the diagnosis, to protect your dad from the hand fate has dealt him. Your medical degree is bloody useless. Throughout it all, this impotence and anguish as your loved one submits to the indignities of major illness, there has been one overwhelming positive. Thank God, I have thought so many times over. Thank God we do not have to worry about how we will ever pay for Dad's treatment. No demands for his credit card on arrival in hospital. No bills for eye-watering sums landing on the doormat. No agonising over whether to remortgage the house to fund the next round of chemo. That I live in a country that chooses through our taxes to provide healthcare without charge to those in need has never made me more proud or grateful. And the thanks and tubs of chocolate my family shower effusively on the staff dispensing the toxic treatments, compassion and kindness to my dad should really be flung wide. For right now, in a sense, like that of every NHS patient, his life is in the hands not of one doctor, but of the nation. All of us who pay the taxes without which the NHS would crumble. His oncologists, his nurses, his hospital bed. It is ultimately thanks to the British people that they exist at all.
And on that note, I'm going to ask one more question before throwing it open. How confident are you that this great institution can continue in that vein in the decades ahead, and what does it take to ensure that it will?
I have no confidence whatsoever that the NHS will see another 5 years, let alone another 10 or 70. Because we need to have that big grown-up conversation that Rachel mentioned before about what we want it to do, because we really, really are at a turning point. And it will be lots of different things. I think it'll be a stealthy creep towards privatisation. It's not just going to be a big announcement that they've sold it off. We're already seeing it here and there. I'll be very interested to see how much of this bonanza actually goes to organisations who have shareholders, who have dividends paid to them. We'll be lured very stealthily by clever politicians into this particular gingerbread house. And if we blink, we'll miss it. And if that blink turned out to be a stroke, then you're all screwed.
But aren't you confident that it could be resisted if that's what you feel strongly about?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we want our NHS and we're prepared to say we want it, and what's more, we're will pay for it, then it can continue. It is fit for purpose. The model did work. Something changed. Don't know what it was 8 years ago, but something changed. And since then, there's been less money and it's not worked so well. And now they're saying, oh, it's more complicated than money. It's not. Lots of variables have changed, but only slightly. Was one variable that's changed massively, which is cash. Sure, the population's getting older, but what's its life expectancy changed in the last 8 years? A fortnight. Of course, there's lots of expensive new drugs, but we already had them. The main thing that's changed is the money, and it wasn't perfect a decade ago, and now it's much less perfect. But if we were able to, make up the money that it didn't have all those years and then keep it going with a reasonable 4%, then I think we can save it.
And I'm more optimistic simply because when it comes to it, it's not their NHS, it's not a politician's NHS, it's our NHS, it belongs to us. We pay for it, it exists for as long as we are willing to make sure it exists, and there are things we can all do to help that happen. Every one of you could spend 5 minutes writing an email letter to your MP tonight, appealing to them for more funding for the NHS. We could all do that, and I think when it comes to the crunch, yes, things are bad at the moment. I think they will continue to get bad because this apparent largesse from the government is a sticking plaster. It's not enough to improve things, but actually the public wants this. We want to keep it, and it's down to us, and we will, I believe.
Thank you very much, both of you. So let's throw it open to the floor. There is a roving microphone. I would urge you to keep your questions brief. If you do work in the NHS or in the health field or social care field and you want to tell us, that's fine.
Hello.
Just here, yeah. Richard.
Hello.
Excellent. Just here.
Is it immoral to recruit staff from other countries, usually less wealthy than ours?
Go for it.
Very, very good question. I think that often staff are recruited from other countries for a period that can be a period of training and development and then go back to the countries from where they've been recruited. So it's not necessarily a one-way drain of expertise that isn't then reversed. But I think we absolutely should not be relying on plundering staff from other countries. Of course, we should be. The NHS should have a long-term workforce plan, as a fit-for-purpose plan, whereby we are generating sufficient doctors and nurses to fund the service. And actually, one of the simple ways you could address that right now that wouldn't require a 6-year delay while we're waiting for new doctors to come through medical school would be to address the retention of staff. So everyone talks about recruitment, it's the retention that's the problem. If you could keep the staffs you had, if you didn't cause them to commit suicide or drive them out to Australia because they can't bear working under these conditions of understaffing anymore, then all of a sudden you've reversed the circle. And that's something that could be addressed right now, and that's what we should be spending the extra money on now, I think.
Yes, down here.
Having worked in the NHS and social care, on government committees, now on training at medical school, I've been through the whole gambit, which has always been about money. But at the end of the day, when you think you've got it, it's always a vote. Have you got your comments about how useful the future of the NHS is? Because what happens is, each party says, vote for me and I'll get it. And it doesn't happen. And I've lived through it for, I suppose, 60 odd years.
Thank you very much.
I think I touched on it earlier, that it isn't particularly helpful, enormous decisions being taken by politicians who are thinking about their next job.
Do you want anything? No. Just here, thank you.
I just wondered whether or not you had any comments about the GMC and its role with registration, because I see it in my generation where people are just retiring and will never return. even part-time, because it's impossible once you've signed off. And I just have a sense of this wastage of senior talent and the pressures it's putting on the younger ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fair to say that among doctors, there are many concerns towards the GMC, so the body that regulates us, that being one of them. This taps into what I just said about retention being key. If you've actually got highly skilled, highly qualified senior nurses and senior doctors, either still at work in the health service or recently retired, you want to be doing everything you can to persuade them to stay. They're not just filling a rota gap. These are the people with the expertise to really bring value back into the health service. And if the GMC is making any additional hurdles that make it even more difficult to get doctors who are newly retired back into the service, then that's a complete madness. And that's one of the things that should be addressed right now, because if we're missing 10,000 doctors. If you could get a few hundred, that would be something. It would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd add to that a bit of my story, which is that I left medicine not because of sort of insidious problems with the road. I was before that. I was a senior registrar working on a labour ward, so I was the most senior doctor on a Sunday afternoon. And when you're on a labour ward, you end up with twice the number of patients you start with, which is normally great. And the highs are very high, but the lows are very low. And this was a situation where, through no one's fault, just through the sad nature of what happens sometimes, we had neither a healthy mum nor a healthy baby. And they say that obstetricians have some kind of major tragedy every 5 or 6 years. And eventually I decided that I couldn't deal with that ever happening to me ever again. But when this happened, and it's in the book, I don't particularly like sort of going into the details out loud too much, but it was like I'd said to the people at work, I've sprained my ankle. It was like, oh no, that's awful, are you all right? But obviously you can still do clinic tomorrow, right? Because there's no slack in the system to say sensible things like, maybe you should have a week off, or maybe every hospital should have some sort of counsellor who can speak to people who've had these sort of terrible events happen. And bring it back round to what you were talking about. I asked if I could go part-time, because I thought the only way I could see myself, the last couple of years to getting to a consultant would be if I sort of had a bit of time to myself. And the answer, which I've still got in writing from them, was, "Are you pregnant?" So that's the approach, and certainly has been, the old-fashioned approach, as the doctor not being human. Because they are human. I once ended up wearing a blood pressure cuff, monitoring my blood pressure in an antenatal clinic, because I'd been to the GP after a night shift. I just moved house, obviously, registered with the GP. My blood pressure was like 9 billion over 2 billion. I said, I've just come off a night shift. They said, no, we need to... So I was sat in clinic, and this patient said to me, "Oh, it's weird, you don't think of your doctor as getting ill, do you?" No. You don't think of your doctor getting sick or sad or making mistakes, because you don't want to think of your doctor being human. But it's actually much more healthy for us to think of our doctors as being human. How many of you, show of hands, work for the NHS, friends in the NHS, neighbours in the NHS, relatives in the NHS? That's a lot of you. Remember that these people are humans, and if you ask them how their day was, they'll go, "Yep, fine," because that's what we're trained to do. But the days are never fine. They can't be. Be the person they can open up to, because you need a pressure release valve. And all I had was sort of jotting down revolting stories in a diary at the time, but that's not enough. And so you need a network of people who remember that doctors are humans, and the people who need to remember that include the GMC, and they include senior management, but they also include doctors and their friends.
Just one about 5 rows back there. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. I'd like to give thanks. My name is Tom. I give thanks to both of the books. I thought they were both brilliant books. And my background is I'm an NHS manager. For a number of years, I've also worked in other industries, so I dedicate this question to myself. I'd like to ask specifically about NHS management and whether you, as doctors personally, ever had aspirations to be a manager, and maybe more broadly your thoughts on the link between the medical profession and management. Are you thinking, I'd love to be running that hospital so I could sort out the medical rota?
Do you want to repeat? Yeah. I think right now I would have to be categorically insane to want to run an NHS hospital. I think it's one of the hardest jobs in the UK at the moment. Every hospital is running a deficit of millions of pounds, most of them anyway, the vast majority, and the pressures you're under, I think, are profound. There's quite a vogue, I would argue, in social media especially, to bash the managers, to blame everything on the managers. I don't think that's fair. I think managers of hospitals and at more senior levels in NHS England have a really tough time because we just get managers giving us a hard time. They get Jeremy Hunt phoning them up and having tantrums on them. I mean, every Monday morning, he's notorious for having a Monday morning meeting when he gets big NHS cheeses in a room and shouts at them and phones people up and screams down the phone at them because they're not doing a good enough job. I mean, that, I think, would be horrific. And I think the pressures you're under trying to run a hospital, if you're being abused like that from above, really, really, really difficult. So no, I absolutely would not want to be involved in the senior management of my hospital because I wouldn't want to be subjected to that kind of pressure and bullying from the politicians above me. I also, and I think a lot of doctors are like this. We didn't go into medicine because we wanted to be powerful. We weren't drawn to the attractions of managing a big team of people. What we were drawn to was the day-to-day going to work and caring for patients and looking after them and sort of coming away feeling as though you've actually helped Mrs. Smith in front of you. And that's very simple and basic, but I'm a pretty basic, simple person, and I think lots of doctors are. They would have become managers from the outset if that was what drew them. They could have gone to business school instead of medical school. They chose medicine because they love caring for people. And shouldn't we be distilling that and cherishing it and making sure that it's nurtured in the NHS, not stamped out by really difficult, overstretched conditions of work? Because that's the lifeblood of the NHS. It's the humanity and care of staff.
I would absolutely agree that managers are a very easy target for mostly from people who have no idea what they're talking about. Oh, it's just the managers. There's too much middle management in the end. I think that it's very important to listen to your front line, but I don't think it's necessary to promote your front line from staff nurse to chief executive, which is often what happens. And my other point is there was a very annoying headline a number of years ago, whenever it was, when they said that the head of the NHS is paid more than the Prime Minister. I think the head of the NHS, if you're looking after a budget of £50 billion or whatever it is, you should have come from the size of business that's used to dealing with a budget of £50 billion. If you've got a workforce of 1.5 million people, that needs to not make you have nightmares. You need to think, okay, that's fine, it's about the same as my last place, or, it will always be But at the moment, if you're paying, I know it's a lot of money in normal terms. If you're paying someone a couple of £100,000 to run an enormous business, they've come from a very small business. We should be paying them fortunes to make big, brave decisions and look at it, holistically. And I think the managers are crucial, and it does anger me when the argument is, oh, it doesn't need more money, we just need, there's just too many managers.
Right. I think we've got time for a couple more. Simon? Yeah.
Could I just ask each of you then, in the light of everything you've said, in a nutshell, what would your advice be to young medical students just going into the profession now?
So, maybe you should go first and I'll go second, because I'm going to be more optimistic than you.
I would say it's the most amazing, rewarding profession in the world. And I would add to that, and not just for financial reasons, I would add to that, buy my book. Because it's a job to go into with both your eyes wide open. You need to know what it is. It's useless. It's worse than useless, pretending that everything's fine and it's compatible with a perfectly easy job like a 9-to-5 might be. Because the people who want to do medicine will still do medicine if they know what it's really like. I'd have still done medicine. I would have not worked on a labour ward. I'd have found, there's this sine wave I sort of mentioned of the height of the highs and the depth of the lows. That's probably got the steepest sine wave in obs and gynae. I'd have found a gentler wave, like dermatology or something, derma holiday we used to call it. But you can still kill patients. But it's you're less on the front. If you say that's just a mole and you've sent someone home with a basal cell carcinoma, you've killed that patient. But it happens less often. It's less of an acute situation. I'd have still done medicine. I'd have still been a doctor, but I wouldn't have worked on a lay ward.
I'd say both books are very good reading, I imagine, for students, medical students, for humble health journalists like me, a very, very good read for understanding the NHS and what goes on day to day. But over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, so I would say, I've already said, I love my job. There is no other job I would rather do in this world. And I've had 2 careers, very different. So absolutely love being a doctor. I think if you're a medical student or you're thinking about studying medicine now, my advice would be, obviously read Adam's book, but remember, as you go through medical school and you start out as a junior doctor, you are motivated by all these good impulses. You want to help, you want to be dedicated, committed, hardworking, member of the team, all of those things. But that doesn't mean you're worth nothing. That doesn't mean you have to somehow think it's acceptable or reasonable to be treated very, very poorly by the institution in which you work. Go into it eyes wide open in the sense that, remember from the outset, you are a highly trained, intelligent, brilliant individual, and you should be treated with respect. I think one fundamental root cause of the junior doctor dispute and the strikes, it really wasn't about Saturday overtime pay, but in part it was about a generation of doctors feeling as though they had been treated appallingly for so long by government, management, our immediate employers. And actually, there's something you can do about that. You can stand up and hold your ground and say, no, I'm worth more than that. And that's what a generation of doctors, my generation, did in 2016. We stood up and said, no, enough is enough. We're not accepting this anymore. And if anything, I think we should all be congratulating Jeremy Hunt, because there is no individual in the whole history of the NHS who has done more to give a browbeaten, crestfalling profession, doctors, their voice. He has made us all stand up for ourselves. So go into medicine, love it, it's brilliant. There is nothing better in the world to do, in my opinion, but stand up for yourself and be proud and make sure you don't get stamped on like Mr. Hunt tried to stamp on us.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be naughty and ask the last question, but ask for a very brief answer from both of you. Apart from money, what would be your 70th birthday present for the NHS? 20 seconds each.
2 seconds. Honesty from the politicians. Stop spinning, stop talking crap. Be honest about the NHS, please.
And I would take it, make it a cross-parliamentary thing, not a party political thing.
But in a hung parliament, not easy.
No, but if it's hardwired, if we completely rethink the way the NHS is structured and the way it's funded and the way our political demonic overlords treat it, if we take it beyond them, out of danger from them, I think it would have a longer and healthier life.
Well, on that clarion call, I'd like to say, and I'm sorry there's not time for more questions, that Rachel and Adam will both be available to sign their books up on the bandstand, and you can buy the books if you wish at the bookstore, which is just out there and to the left. So on behalf of you, I'd like to thank very much Rachel and Adam for giving up their time and stimulating a fascinating and very amusing discussion about the NHS and all the wonderful things that happen there. So thank you very much indeed.